Πολύ εξ ονόματος της ομάδας των Ευρωπαίων Συντηρητικών και Μεταρρυθμιστών, ο κύριος Eppink, παρακαλώ.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I visited Cyprus in spring last year, and I wondered how the country would deal with the EU presidency. A small island with so much diversity looks like Europe in a nutshell. There are Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, and next to them Russians, British, Lebanese, and many other people running around in your country. I admit I was also sceptical because you, Mr. Christofias, are a long-standing communist. You were trained at the party school in Moscow in the 1970s. That sounds scary to European conservatives. You are in fact the first, and I presume the last, communist rotating president of the EU. But you are also the only communist I know who is against the financial transaction tax. And please convince your comrades over there, they're very close to you. At the end of your presidency, I want to be honest, Mr. President, I think you, your government and your officials did very well. Let me address you in the language of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Благодарю вас за хорошую работу и желаю процветания Кипру. Since Russian, Mrs. President, is not an official language of the EU yet, I thank the President for the good work and wish him a blossoming Cyprus. But unfortunately, Cyprus is not blossoming now. In fact, it is in need of a bailout, and Mr. President, you are getting from the ruble to the rubble. If bailout, the debt of Cyprus jumps to 150% of GDP, so are you bailing out? Who are we bailing out? You or the Russian billionaires? Cyprus established a good record as rotating president. There is a budget for this year. Progress has been made on the banking supervision. The single European patent was agreed after 30 years. One dossier remains stuck, however, the two-pack, to assure fiscal discipline in the Eurozone. That is not your fault, Mr. President, it is our fault. The Parliament should approve this piece of legislation soon. But oddly enough, it is held ransom by the leader of the Liberal group, Mr. Verhofstadt. He demands mutualisation of debt, like redemption funds and Eurobonds, in return. Now, I know Mr. Verhofstadt for about 20 years, and mostly it was a pleasure because life would be boring without him, Mr. Barroso, wouldn't it? But it struck me that he always wants to jump from A to Z, whereas he is not able to get from A to B. To get proper underpinning for the euro, we need the two-pack. We need to progress step by step from A to B to C and so on. So I appeal to the Liberal group to approve this two-pack. Mr. Watson, you are listening to me, I presume. Practice what you preach, please. So, Mr. President, большое спасибо, всего хорошего в жизни. До свидания.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eppink. Ms. Thun und Hohenstein would like to ask you a question. Would you take it? Mrs. Hohenstein, you have the floor.
I have a question to you, Mr. Eppink. Do you think that in the end of the Cypriot Presidency, where we all agree that they make significant progress, this is the best way to address the president of the country in a language that's not an EU language, that's a foreign language that you never checked if he knew? As you know, from the communist way, many people develop into real democrats and Europeans, as we can even witness in this very room. Do you think that the best method is to be extremely impolite and aggressive towards those who come and take a dialogue and cooperation with us?
Thank you, Ms. Hohenstein. Mr. Eppink.
Mrs. President, I just try to be kind to the President. And the President has studied in Moscow at a party school, so I'm sure that he speaks and understands Russian. Allow me to use just a few phrases for hospitality. So I don't understand the question. I haven't been insultive or invasive in any way. Thank you. And I also spoke within my speaking time, by the way.
Mr. Eppink, there is another question for you from Ms. Wilkström. You accept? Mrs. Wilkström, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Eppink, for your intervention. Indeed, somehow refreshing. But Mr. Verhofstadt, who is absent in this chamber this morning and thus cannot defend himself, nor himself or his visions, I am here to replace him. And on behalf of the ALDE group, I would like to listen to you. What are the visions for the EFD for Europe? What we need today in these times of financial crisis would be persons to stand up, as Mr. Verhofstadt does always, to have a vision for a bright future for Europe. I lacked that in your political group. We are facing economical crisis, but it's also a crisis of values, and someone has to be brave and courageous. Mr. Verhofstadt is one of those political leaders.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkström. Mr. Eppink.
Mrs. President, I care to say that I am not a member of the EFD. The president of the EFD, Mr. Farage, should be here, but he's not here. I'm a member of the ECR. And I'm very constructive with regard to the six-pack. I've always been. I voted in favour of the six-pack, contrary to some people on the other side of this House. And I'm also in favour of the two-pack. And I agree with the President here that the two-pack is needed. It is needed now.
Thank you, Mr. Eppink. Και τώρα εξ ονόματος της Ευρώπης, της Ελευθερίας και της Δημοκρατίας, κυρία